You know, we've been talking about the first church in the book of Acts. And one of the reasons that we have been looking at this first church in Acts, the very first church in Acts so intently, is to analyze or examine in detail the church universal, and more specifically, Live Well Church. We've been looking at this church of Acts and seeing how we can mirror some of the things that this church did to make sure that we're on task. That's what we want to do. This first church is much different than the church that we see today. In the book of Acts, the first church didn't have the cross. They didn't have Zion sitting there playing the piano. They didn't have microphones. There was not all this pomp and circumstance and all of this different things that we do. They just came together as a community. And this first church was not only a community, but this first church, we said it last week, it was a movement with a mission and a message and people with high moral character. And one of the most important aspects of this first church was that it was miraculous. It had the ability to wield the miraculous in the lives of those who were part of the church, part of this community. They were people who came together because they wanted better. It was a movement. But it wasn't just a movement like the civil rights movement. It wasn't just a movement like the movement that's going on in Washington tomorrow, but it was a divine movement. It was of God. I'm not saying civil rights wasn't of God and other movements are not of God, but this was distinctively about God. And because it was about God, because it was all about God, it gave the opportunity for those who were involved to experience the miraculous. The miraculous. The miraculous. We said the Church of Acts, again, was a movement. It had a movement. Very important. Every church must have a movement. The church we see today with the buildings and the steeples and the cross and the choir and all of that, that is the institutional church. But this first church was a movement. It was a church without walls. Didn't have a building. The people met in people's homes and they came together just like we're coming together now. It's a movement. People saw something miraculous happening in the lives of the apostles. People who were ordinary men, untrained, uneducated fishermen who were now doing great things for God. And just because they were untrained and uneducated didn't mean that they stayed that way. They begin to grow in God's grace. And as they begin to grow in God's grace, they begin to learn and they begin to grow and they begin to do the miraculous. And people were drawn to that, Paul. That's what attracted people to the church, the miraculous. The wonders, signs and wonders. You know, we have a hard time, those who are outside of the church, believing in the miraculous. I don't have time to read now. I have a book there that I've been looking at, and it talks about how historians, they have trouble sometimes documenting the miraculous things within the Bible. And it's not because they didn't happen. It just goes against their reasoning, because they have to analyze things from a historical perspective. And so they often will leave out the signs and wonders that make up the church. But I want you to know today that the church was built on the miraculous. The church was built on the miraculous. And the church today must still experience the miraculous. I believe, based upon the word, that these statements constitute or are essential components to a Christ-centered church. A mission, a message, high moral character, and the miraculous. That's a Christ-centered church. Yeah. What is the mission? I always step out on a limb when I say this. What is the mission of Live Well Church? And don't say it. I hear different things. But our mission is to help people live well through Christ. Some people say, oh, give out turkeys. No. We have a Christ-centered mission to help people live well through Christ, to build people up mentally, spiritually, and physically, so that God would get the glory. That is our mission. Every church is a living organism and has a mission. They have a universal mission, which comes from the Great Commission, and they have a specific mission that God has given them, that gifted them with. When people come here, they're supposed to be built up physically. We have healing here. That's the miraculous. I've seen people healed through this ministry. I've seen people who have received a heart transplant through this ministry. God has done it. People are supposed to be built up mentally. You're supposed to have a different mindset, to think differently. You may have been raised one way, and I'm not just talking about ghetto lifestyle or this type. You may have been raised in a suburban environment, in the upper crest, the upper echelon, and your mindset is fixated and not able to look at those with compassion who are raised differently than you. You need a different mind, a God perspective. That's what the church does. It opens your eyes so you can see the whole pie. Yeah, not just your piece or your slice or your community or your experience, but so you can look at the whole entire pie. That's what the church does. And the church builds us up spiritually. Spiritually. Paul says in Ephesians that you were once dead in your trespasses and sins. He's talking about spiritually dead. But now you're alive in Christ. And you ought to live well. You ought to experience life to the full, glorifying God, because now you're alive. You're alive. You're alive. You don't have to be bound by sin and bound by fear, bound by your past, but now you're alive in Christ. That is what the church is supposed to teach disciples of Christ, those who have been called to this Christian lifestyle. You're alive. You can go on. You can live your dreams. You can go back to school. You can go higher. You can get a new job. You can relocate. You can live whatever God is calling you to do. You can overcome addiction. You can get married again. You can be restored and renewed, revived. That's what the church is about. Yeah. Without Christ, the church's movement might advance, but it will not last. Without Christ, you could be a movement. Many churches, they come together with this great movement. But without Christ, without the church being centered in Christ, the movement will advance, but it won't last. Yeah, without Christ, the church's mission might seem appealing, but eventually the assignment will end. There are many churches that start with their own specific mission. Our mission is to feed this person, or to work in there, or to go over there and help those people, and to do that. And that's a great thing. But if it's not centered in Christ, the assignment will eventually end. Yeah, it will end. I'm not saying you won't get another assignment, but that assignment that is not centered in Christ will end. Without Christ, a church message might resonate as profound, but it will not move people to live well and to live holy if it's not centered in Christ. Oh my God, there are messages that you hear on the airwaves now, and they inspire you, and you clap, and you feel happy. And the moment you turn on the radio, you go back to living the way that you normally live. There are people who go to churches every day, and they hear all these messages preached by great men and women of God, and that's a good thing. I'd love for you guys to stand up and say amen, and throw towels at me, and throw all pocketbooks at me, and scream and yell and go crazy while I'm preaching. I would say yes. But my heart would be broken if you went home and you didn't live better. My heart would be broken if you didn't think differently. My heart would be broken if I didn't see you come in here and exercise and try to build up your body. I would be disappointed in what I was preaching. Yeah, because Christ's message, even though it's profound, the message, the church's message, even though it resonates profoundly, if it is not centered in Christ, it will not move people to live better, to live holy, to live well. Yeah. Without Christ, the people who make up the church, they may have high moral standards, but the church will just be a legalistic, self-righteous community without Christ. A church without Christ, the people may live with high morality. We don't do that here. We dress like this here. We talk like this here. All of our board members have doctorates. Amen. Get those doctorates. But without Christ, that's all you have. A bunch of people with doctorates. Without Christ, that's all you have is a bunch of people with titles. I've seen people who have been ushers all their life in churches that were not Christ-centered, and after they finish ushering, they go out there and live like animals. I've seen preachers who can preach the